So last time we caught up with Will, he was water guy. Prior to that, he was river dude, I think. But we've watched the development of water in Star Citizen from just a basic little flat jello death trap to getting some form of interactivity in rivers a couple years ago, to update to now we're about to see the actual simulation with what they introduced to us kind of at CitizenCon with all the effects. So we're going to jump in here. I am going to interrupt freely and prolifically, and I hope you enjoy watching as we do, and also, you know, the news that's coming up. Welcome and thank you for joining. This is where we kind of react to stuff. Anyways, let's go.
323 is just around the corner, and with that, a host of new gameplay and general life in the verse features. But it also includes a variety of technological improvements like the replication layer split, our initial implementation of Vulkan, image upscaling breakthroughs, and the subject of this week's show, changes to the water rendering and simulation system that were first discussed at last year's CitizenCon. So here now are the water wizards themselves to tell us more.
You've been doing this for a while now. Why do you think people are so interested in water?
In just any scenario is such a focal point. You go to a national park, you go see the rivers and the waterfalls, you're looking up stock photos of anything. It's people focus on the water because it is just so different to kind of anything else you find in nature.
Water looks good.
Everything's unique and everything's different, but
Water's great.
Water is just something else entirely. Wow, you're making me sound like I'm a water cult or something.
When you came aboard, did you imagine?
I grew up not near water for most of my life, and then I came and moved out here where my wife is from, and there's always water. And I do agree. It's more interesting than not water, at least to look at.
You'd be the moist master.
I still don't refer to myself as that name, try as you might, Jared.
Hydro homie?
I guess I didn't see it being such a focus, but I'm glad that it is. It's good fun. I really like it. It's not all water. Water's just the nice things I get to talk about more.
Does the water actually flow up on the shore like that?
Someone asked me when I was at CitCon recently, what makes water 3D in games? What's different to anything else? And the truth is, you have to work to make it look like water, because what we perceive as a volumetric liquid in real life, in graphics, we break down into different parts. You have the water surface, which is what you see reflecting, what you can look through, where you see your waves and your foam and so on. You have the fog underneath, and any particles floating around that makes you feel like you're inside water rather than just underneath a...
See now, why would we need to feel like we're inside water? What y'all planning for?
Surface above you. And then you have all the effects that go to selling that, whether it be the lighting, the caustics, the boundary when it's intersecting your visor,
wow,
or any of the splashes or simulation that we're going to move on to.
That looked fantastic.
So we showed a slice of what we've been doing with water at CitCon last year, and what we put out into 323 is a few steps ahead of that. So we're going to show you what we've been able to do since. Getting the rendering right was really key to making sure that the sim looks right, because anything that catches your eye and tells you this isn't real is going to stick out far more than any work that we put into the sim.
It has to be said that the way we rendered water in the past in Star Citizen was not really up to scratch. So we have spent a lot of time trying to make it a lot more realistic. Water is quite an interesting thing to render. It has very complex form in its dynamics and the way it animates, but optically it's very interesting too. In some ways, water is like glass. It's transparent, it refracts and distorts light which passes through it.
Yo, what the heck? From underwater? I guess I've never paid attention to that, if that even happens in games. That's cool.
It refracts and distorts light which passes through it.
Wow.
And it also has a surface which reflects the environment around it. In some ways, water is also like fog. It obscures the background behind it, maybe completely obscuring it. And certainly impure water will have suspended particles which themselves reflect light and give the water a cloudy hue. The water surface may feature foam, certainly where waves are occurring or at shorelines. One thing we wanted to do was improve the way we render foam on the ocean surface. This involved having it show detail when viewed close up, and also having it disperse in a very
there's going to be
naturalistic.
seaweed in this game. I hate touching seaweed. I mean, I know it's your realm. It's your domain. You deserve it. Just, don't touch my feet.
Way where the foam breaks apart into small patches and the bubbles dissipate. One thing we did to get the details on the close-up views of foam is photograph a pan of soapy water. This gave us the required detail to project onto the foam surface and give the look we wanted.
Soapy water.
It's nice to think that all of the foam you see on any ocean in the verse started its life in a soapy pan of water in my kitchen.
Just a dish soap. Dish soap?
In Star Citizen, players can enter the water. This means they can view the water from underneath the surface. So we spent lots of time making sure underwater views look correct.
That looks great. I like the kind of fogginess.
Underneath
It looks
the surface.
good. I mean,
So we
it's
spent lots of...
I don't know how bad does underwater water look. This looks pretty good. I don't know what the standard for games is. I don't spend much time underwater because honestly, I don't. Ever since Super Mario 64 with that giant eel, and then Echo the Dolphin, I think those games put the fear of deep water in video games and generally in real life in me when I was pretty young.
time making sure underwater views look correct, showing fogging and so on. Similarly, when the player enters the water line may cut across the player's visor, and we took a lot of time getting that to render correctly and show as expected.
I really think the improvements that have gone into the rendering of the water, especially the surface, the fog, it's leaps and bounds ahead of what was in 3.22. So from rendering, let's move on to surface simulation.
The rendering looks good.
What we wanted to do was provide some next level visuals to go with all the things that can interact with water in our game. With the nature of the sandbox universe, there's just so many ways you can interact with it. And with all our spaceships and the colossal thrusters and wake.
It's funny because the water effects now in some cases look better than the normal ground effects with these ships. You don't get nearly enough cloud when you're landing in the reclaimer. But now when you're flying over water, you got a nice cloud up behind you.
Ways you can interact with it. And with all our spaceships and the colossal thrusters and wakes they can throw off, we really wanted to be able to match that with the water rendering. The way we decided to approach this, instead of having a square that follows the camera, like many games do, of water simulation, we wanted to have something more powerful than this. We wanted you to be able to stand at the...
Let's talk about, I do see some comments coming up about like, why are they doing this? They spent 50 million on this. Let's talk a little bit about how this works. So what they've built is part of the game engine. And generally they're trying to finish most of the game engine before they put in the major parts of the gameplay and the content. Because at some point, if you are toying with the game engine while you're toying with the game, you get basically what we've had in Star Citizen all this time, which is like everything is constantly broken and just keeps re-breaking. So instead of doing all of these engine related things that may or may not mess with physics or gameplay later on in the beta phase, they're doing it now so that when other gameplay is put in the game, like say base building, they don't have to then add the water physics and suddenly it breaks base building and then they have to go back and fix base building and then they fix the water physics again and then everything is good. Another thing that makes this kind of make sense, and this is kind of secondhand knowledge, I haven't been told by a dev this or anything, this might have been something they said and I missed it. This is not just a water simulation. This is a cloth simulation. The water itself is still using the actual cloth tech they've developed. So it's not like they just went and spent a ton of money on one feature that's not going to be used for anything else. This very well may have some crossover with other things that are working in the game, like flags and armor and robes and bed sheets. So there are a few different reasons why this is happening. It's not necessarily because they want to just get flashy things into the game quickly. It lines up with the development and how it's working. And it's also something that they probably had to do for Squadron 42 anyways. This will make space battles much better. I've got a real worrying fact for you. Ever since 2015, this has not been solely a space game. And I feel like most of their development ends up being not about space, to be honest. But yeah, this is one part of the game. Most of you guys might not ever care about water, but it's something that they wanted to get done for the engine, and that's why it's here.
Water simulation. We wanted to have something more powerful than this. We wanted you to be able to stand at the top of a mountain and watch a ship fly across a lake underneath.
You can actually tell right there that it's a cloth simulation. Look at the water here.
We wanted you to be able to stand at the top.
Look how it's just stacking up and not breaking. Because it's not, they're just using something similar to what they do for their cloth simulations. Well, again, hearsay. But it makes sense. And, you know, from the game developers I talked to, it's like a really normal thing to do.
Top of a mountain and watch a ship fly across a lake underneath, drawing the wake behind it. And you wouldn't get that with a fixed square around the camera. So the approach we took was something called region-based surface simulation. This allows us to allocate areas where we need to be simulating and propagating water waves at any given moment, regardless of where the camera is. We can allocate and deallocate these as we need, and we can have a pool of them of any size depending on the spec of your PC. You can actually change the maximum allowed regions in your graphics options.
On medium setting,
Jeez.
you can have 32 regions simulated at the same time.
You can straight up see the ground under the water.
Setting, you can have 32 regions simulated at the same time. You can even go to a very high setting, which would give you as many as 128. To choose the best regions, we try to have the closest and most important ones show up and call the other ones. The fact that we sort it by the number of interaction and how strong they are means that only the most important ones will be shown on screen, which helps because having a little interaction right in front of you could be useful.
I didn't even see that star lifter.
And call the other ones. The fact that we sort it by the number of interaction and how strong they are means that only the most important ones will be shown on screen, which helps because having a little interaction right in front of you could be useful, but it might not be visible when there's a very big ship going right by and creating a huge wave.
Sounds like
That's
you've
pretty
built a very
cool.
efficient system then.
We've tried to build a very efficient system.
In order to interact with things that are in the water, we first need to know that they are there. We've hooked up to the physics system so it sends us events when physical objects like boxes or the player or bits of ship debris are in or floating in the water. From there we can work out how much water has been displaced and the velocity and pick an appropriate simulation.
Oh my god, they used to talk so much about buoyancy in their monthly reports. I'm glad to see it's finally being... Actually, I bet you we can find one of those clips from way back when they were first experimenting with this. How do you spell buoyancy? Yeah, look at that. 2021 buoyancy tests. And this is where I think this might have been Will actually might have been commentating on this. But this is where they were showing their first tests with this kind of tech inside Star Citizen. And as you can see, it wasn't buoyant. They were just kind of sitting there. And now, here we are.
From there we can work out how much water has been displaced and the velocity and pick an appropriate simulation wave speed to match those. From there we can apply forces to different texels of each sim region, which then propagate as we update that region over time. As well as responding to physical objects in the water, we can also hook this up to other...
Imagine shooting down a ship over a lake. What is that going to do to your graphics card when all the boxes hit the water? Should we all just look away? If you want to stay into the game, don't look at the boxes in the water. That's going to be crazy.
Input types.
For example, we could have a ship falling into water, creating a huge displacement. But we can also have footsteps near the beach. Or we could also have bullets and missiles and explosions. For the player, this means that you can be way more immersed in your game, as you can see the direct effects of what you are doing, how you are playing.
Man, they love getting these Star Wars shots in whenever they use the Scorpius.
On the water.
We wanted to be able to create the best visual impact we could without having an impact on your bandwidth and server performance, etc., especially as we move into bigger and bigger player counts. So our water simulation is done on the client and is visual only, and I think that way we get the best possible result out of it.
All of the information that we get from the different systems is then packaged and sent to the water buffer.
The water
Tying
buffer.
this all together is the water buffer. This allows us to take in inputs from multiple systems to the shape of the water surface and then use that information in lots of other systems, such as additional effects and, of course, rendering the water. Each patch of ocean is able to render with both the water buffer on and off. If it is off, it simply shows the ocean waves according to where it is on the planet. If it is on, it first populates the water buffer region with the wave data in that patch. We then add in any simulation data or data from other inputs. Then when we come to render the ocean patch, we look up again from this buffer where we have the total added together result of both the original ocean waves, the simulation, and any other inputs. To copy the simulation in, we build a mesh that covers parts of the water buffer that we're going to write into. The UV coordinates of each vertex in that mesh point to a specific part of the region atlas. This allows us to read specific parts of simulations and input them to other parts of the water buffer, and it allows us to do it in just one draw call. Having the water buffer set up like this to receive multiple inputs leaves the door open for implementing multiple types of simulation going forward. For example, beach crest waves could be input into this system. This means as well that any other system nearby can look up to see where the waves are and see how high the water is. We use this to drive a number of different effects.
Okay.
Having the water buffer allows us to have the graphic system query what nearby waves are doing. This allows us to render things called caustics. Caustics are where the ocean surface is focusing sunlight onto areas nearby. So for example, it may focus light from the sun onto the seabed,
Jeez.
making certain bright patches animate around. And similarly, light can be reflected upwards onto the side of a vehicle, for example. Caustics are a very important visual clue for water.
Hold on. How does this look compared to what they showed us before? Because they showed us almost this exact same shot back when they were first working on this with the 400i. Let me see if I can find this. There we go. Oh my gosh, look at that's night and day difference. Oh, wow.
Leaving them out would
Wait a second. Hold the phone, Charlie.
ramp around.
Get out of here.
And similarly, light can be reflected upwards onto
Look
the
at
side
how
of a vehicle,
freaking
for example.
chaotic that looks on the right.
Important visual clue for water.
I mean, it is a river, so it would be more intense. But even just the subtlety of what's here on the left looks more realistic too. It looks worse? I don't know. I think that looks way better. This looks hyperactive to me.
Well, that was a look into all the
But that also could be the speed of the water that's flowing by.
The whole thing is pretty sweet.
I don't know. I feel like the new stuff looks a lot better to me.
I'm really happy with how it looks. The team has done a
All right, let's go back to what they were saying.
Making certain bright patches animate around. And similarly, light can be reflected upwards onto the side of a vehicle, for example. Caustics are a very important visual clue for water rendering, and leaving them out would have meant the water did not look correct.
Well, that was a look into all the work that went into the water in 323. The whole thing is pretty sweet. I'm really happy with how it looks. The team has done a fantastic job. Planet Tech have got some really exciting things coming. I'm really, really excited to dive back into the planets of Star Citizen. I hope you guys enjoy it.
They haven't talked too much about Planet Tech lately, but V5 is coming up.
So what did we learn this week? Well, we learned that the updated rendering system makes water look more like water, that region-based simulation makes water behave more like water, and that the new water buffer itself hooks into all the other systems, like physics, which will get its own series of improvements down the line, to make water interact better with the variety of things that players throw into it. Boy, you love throwing things into the water, don't you? For Inside Star Citizen, I'm Jared Huckabee. Thanks for letting us share the process of game development with you, and we'll see you all here next week.
Thanks. No teaser today? No teaser today. All right, so that's water. Water. As we saw from some of those clips that we looked at, it's gotten better, but I think that there's still definitely work for them to do on it.